The cab was its own little world, sealed up against a Wyoming night that didn't care if you were tired or broke or late. The engine settled into a low hum that lived in the steering column and the floorboards. The wind never stopped. It didn't slam the truck around, not yet, but it leaned on the trailer like it was testing a fence for weak boards. People talk about Wyoming like it's a place. At this hour, it felt more like a corridor, a stretch of empty air built for moving through, not living in. Every once in a while, the shoulder spit gravel at the undercarriage, sharp little ticks that sounded like somebody flicking pebbles at metal. Most of the time, it was just tires on cold pavement and that steady breath the trailer makes when it's tracking true. My mirror checks ran on a rhythm I didn't remember choosing. Left, right, spot, back to the lane. Do it long enough and it turns into muscle memory. Stop doing it, and you learn real fast why it matters. I kept my speed steady because that's how you keep dry freight honest. It doesn't sing to you. It doesn't have a unit buzzing or a temperature display reminding you it's back there. It's just wait, strapped and boxed, waiting for a chance to shift when you get lazy. A small surge, and the trailer starts to feel loose. A hard correction, and you can feel the whole box want to sway. I'd learned to drive like I was carrying something fragile, even when I wasn't. It wasn't fear, it was math, and it was habit. Coffee rode in the cup holder, lukewarm and bitter, the kind you drink because the routine helps you stay awake. The heater was on, but the air still dried my eyes out like a cheap motel vent. My hands smelled like old steering wheel and diesel, even after you scrubbed them. That smell gets into you. It settles under your nails, into your sleeves, into the seams of the seat. You can put on clean clothes and still feel like a fuel island. The dash washed the cab in tired green light. Gauges sat where I liked them. Oil pressure steady, air good, voltage fine. The trailer lights in the mirror were two red dots that didn't blink or wander. I trusted those dots. When you spend your nights on the road, you start trusting small things that stay consistent. Big promises don't mean much out here. The little indicators do. This was an overnight run, the kind that pays a little better because it steals your sleep in your normal hours. Delivery had to happen before dawn. No excuses, no late call, no sorry about the wind. The receiver doesn't care what the highway felt like. They care about the appointment time and the signature. I had a window, and the miles were the only way to keep it open. I'd been short on premium runs this month. Dispatch called them premium like it was a reward. What it really meant was the difference between squeaking by and falling behind. Miss a premium run and you don't get yelled at. You just stop getting offered the good ones. You watch the miles go to somebody else, somebody who says yes faster and never complains. That's how the job works. You either stay useful or you become optional. I had a payment coming due, close enough that I could feel it sitting on my chest when the road went quiet. I'd run the numbers twice, and they didn't add. Not a someday problem. A date, a number, and a reminder that the world doesn't pause because you're tired. I didn't need a lecture about responsibility. I needed to keep the truck moving and get the load drop before the sky started to turn. I wasn't superstitious. I didn't hang charms on the mirror. I didn't knock on wood or read meaning into every weird shadow in the headlights. I believed in procedures, pre-trip, route plan, fuel plan, logs, knowing when to pull over before fatigue makes the choice for you. Most bad nights start with someone deciding they're the exception, that they can push a little harder, skip a step, make it up later. That's how you end up on the shoulder with your flashers going, watching your breath fog the glass while the world keeps moving past you at 70. Out here, the dark isn't just the absence of light, it's space, distance, the kind of emptiness that makes your brain start filling it with whatever it can find if you let it. I kept my eyes on the lane markers and my hands relaxed on the wheel, and I reminded myself the road didn't need my imagination. It needed my attention. I've driven nights long enough to know the dark isn't empty out here, I said, and even to me it sounded like a warning. The words hung in the cab for a second, swallowed by the engine and the wind. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. The truck kept rolling, steady and controlled, the way it was supposed to. I watched the mirrors, I watched the line, and I drove like discipline was the only thing between me and the kind of night you don't come back from. I'd taken the run earlier that afternoon, while there was still color in the sky and the day shift noise hadn't faded into that thin evening hush. The dispatch office was busy in the way it always got around shift change. Phones ringing, printers spitting out paperwork, guys leaning on counters with their caps in their hands like they were asking a favor instead of picking up work. I walked in, signed what I needed to sign, checked the appointment time, and did the quick math in my head before anyone could start talking me into something worse. Overnight, Wyoming, early delivery. It wasn't the first time I'd seen that combination, and it wouldn't be the last, but there was a note attached to the load that made my stomach tighten a little. Team run. 2 drivers, not optional. It wasn't just policy either. It was hours of service and liability and all the ways the company covered its own skin. They didn't want a single driver pushing through the night on caffeine and stubbornness. Not on that stretch. Not when the wind could knock a trailer sideways if you got lazy with your speed or careless with a correction. I didn't argue. I wasn't in a position to argue. The run paid better than the day freight, and I needed the better runs right now. If you're short on miles, you don't get picky about the conditions. You get picky later when you're ahead enough to say no. I wasn't ahead. I was holding the line, and the line kept moving. I asked who they had for me, and I got the same answer people always get when the company's short-staffed. They didn't have anyone yet. They'd figure it out. I'd get a partner. That was the whole message. You're getting a partner. Like they were assigning me a tool, like it was a spare tire. By the time I got back to the truck and ran my own checks, the afternoon had started to slide into evening. I went through the paperwork again. Not because I didn't trust dispatch, but because I didn't trust anything that could cost me time. Bills, load number, pickup reference, delivery window, route notes. Every line mattered if something went sideways at 2 a.m, and you had to explain yourself to someone who'd been asleep in a warm bed. I planned fuel like I always did. Not romantic, not heroic, just practical. Where I could stop without losing too much time, where the truck lanes were decent, where I knew the pumps actually worked in cold weather. I thought about wind zones the way other people thought about weather. Not as a conversation piece, but as a variable that could shove your trailer a foot sideways if it caught you wrong. There were stretches on I-80 where you could feel the gusts coming out of nowhere, like the land itself was taking a breath and pushing you around for fun. That mattered. It meant you don't coast downhill like an idiot, and you don't slam on the brakes if something surprises you. You keep your lane. You keep your speed steady. You stay boring. I also marked the places where I could slow safely if I had to. A lot of people don't think about that. They assume you can just ease off whenever you want. In daylight, with traffic around, maybe you can. At night, in crosswind, with a trailer that wants to drift, a casual slowdown can turn into a wobble if you're not paying attention. I didn't like surprises, so I planned around them. I'd learned that a long time ago, and the lessons weren't the kind you forget. I was sitting in the driver's seat writing quick notes on the back of a receipt when dispatch called again. They'd found someone. Last-minute assignment. A swap. Short-staffed, like always. The tone wasn't apologetic. It was matter-of-fact, like they were telling me the sun was setting. Sam Keller showed up an hour later with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a coffee in his hand like it was part of the uniform. Younger than me by enough that I noticed it right away. Not a kid, but not worn down yet either. The kind of guy who still had energy for talking. The kind of guy who walked like his knees didn't hurt and his back wasn't one bad twist away from reminding him he was human. He climbed into the cab like he'd done it 1,000 times, and maybe he had. He didn't hesitate, didn't do that careful look around some new partners do. He just settled in, tossed his duffel into the sleeper area, and started making himself comfortable. He talked fast, too, quick bursts of words, like he didn't leave space for the cab to get quiet. I'd seen that before. Some people can't stand silence on night runs. Silence makes you think. Sam wasn't dumb. I could tell that in the first 5 minutes. He watched what I did. He noticed the clipboard. He noticed the way I checked the mirrors even sitting still. He just treated it like a personality quirk instead of a survival habit. He trusted paychecks, coffee, and the idea that roads are just roads. If something went wrong, it would be mechanical. If it wasn't mechanical, it would be a person. Bad drivers, bad weather, bad luck. Not anything else. That was where we didn't match. We weren't friends. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But we were functional. That's all a team run really needs. Two people who can share a space without killing each other and who can keep the wheels turning when one of them needs sleep. I didn't need a buddy. I needed someone who could drive straight, log his hours, and not do something stupid at the wrong time. Sam had a habit of calling me boss or old man, like it was funny. It didn't bother me. I'd been called worse by better people. He used it to keep things light, and I let it slide because the cab is too small for pride. Pride fills space you need for air. He glanced at my notes and asked why I was writing like I was building a case file. He didn't ask it mean. He asked it like he couldn't imagine doing it any other way. I told him I liked knowing what I was doing before I did it. He shrugged, like planning was something that happened to other people. Then he looked out at the long stretch of highway ahead, the kind of road that makes you feel like you're driving into the edge of the map, and he smiled like he'd been waiting for it. Man, Wyoming at night is just a straight line and a paycheck, Sam said, like he'd practiced it. I didn't smile back, not because I was mad, but because I'd heard that exact confidence from people right before the night took a bite out of them. Straight lines were the ones that got you. Straight lines made you comfortable. Straight lines made you stop checking your mirrors because nothing ever changed. Until it did. Straight lines are where you fall asleep, I said, and my voice came out flatter than I meant it to. Sam laughed it off, not with words, just with that easy sound some people make when they think you're being dramatic. He settled back, sipped his coffee, and stared out at the dark like it owed him something. I went back to the paperwork, to the route, to the small decisions that keep you alive and employed. I told myself it was fine. It was just a partner, just another night, just miles. But even then, with the engine idling steady and the road waiting, I could feel the difference between us like a pressure change. Sam believed the night was empty. I treated it like a place with rules you didn't get to debate. We hit the yard before the sun was fully gone, that gray hour when the world starts losing detail. The GPS pulled us off I-80 onto a frontage road with nothing on it but low industrial buildings and a fence line. The paperwork called it Red Basin Freight Yard. In the real world, it was chain link, cold light, and the feeling that you weren't supposed to linger. There wasn't a big sign, just a small placard bolted to the fence. A sliding gate sat between concrete posts, and above it high-mast lights burned hard and white, the kind that flatten color and make everything look like evidence. Cameras were everywhere, poles, corners, the gate itself, lenses aimed down the lane like they were counting axles, more than you'd expect for a yard moving basic dry freight. I eased up to the keypad and entered the code from the bills. It beeped, and the gate slid open without a voice on a speaker and without anyone stepping out to wave us through. The place didn't greet you. It just opened and waited. Inside, the lot was laid out in straight lines, gravel packed hard, tire marks frozen into shallow ruts. Pallets wrapped in clear plastic sat under the lights, retail fixtures and boxed goods stacked neat and anonymous. A couple containers with faded logos leaned along the fence. The air smelled normal. Diesel, dust, cold metal. No chemical sting, no sweetness, no reefer hum. Nothing that said the cargo was anything but cardboard and strapped-down weight. The weirdness was purely procedural. No office window, no check-in booth, no sign telling drivers where to go. Just a painted stop line in a closed building with tall doors and light leaking from underneath one of them. Nobody walked the lot. Nobody yelled over an engine. Even the noise felt controlled, like the yard had decided voices were optional tonight. The trailer we were assigned was already staged near the back fence, sitting by itself instead of in a row. White box, standard length, no company name, only a serial number stenciled near the front. The reflective tape looked newer than the rest of the skin. The rear doors were shut tight and sealed. From the cab, it looked like any other drive van you'd pull for a retail run, and that should have been the end of it. I rolled past once, slow, reading the yard the way I read a truck stop lot at 2 a.m, where the exits were, which cameras covered which angles. Sam shifted in the passenger seat, bored and restless, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He treated the whole setup like security theater. A door on the building opened, and a man stepped out in a work jacket with a reflective stripe across the chest. Gloves on, head down. He walked toward the truck like he was approaching equipment, not people, and stopped short of my headlights. His eyes flicked past the cab to the stage trailer, like he was confirming something in his head. "Hook up and roll," the yard guy muttered without looking at my face. Then he turned and went back inside. No name, no handshake, no bill check. Just a sentence and a closing door. I pulled forward and lined up the fifth wheel, backing under the trailer slow. The kingpin seated with a clean clunk I felt through the frame. I set the brakes and climbed down for my walk-around, glad hands tight, light cord seated, landing gear stowed. Tires looked good, lights steady, everything normal enough to make you relax, which is when you start missing the small stuff. The seal was new, intact, right where it should be. The problem was what it was made of. Not the standard plastic strip I was used to logging and scanning, but a metal-bodied seal stamped deep with a number that didn't match our usual format. No barcode, no branding, just an ID pressed into steel like it mattered. The lock felt heavy in my hand, weatherproof, built like it expected to be tested, not like it was protecting a few pallets of boxed shelving. In the reflection of the door hardware, I caught one of the cameras angled down at the exact spot where I stood. It didn't move. It didn't have to. The whole place was built to see. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. The truck shuddered once, then settled into idle. Sam watched me like this was all routine. And maybe it was. Maybe they'd had theft issues. Maybe a customer demanded tighter security. But when I rolled toward the gate, it was already open again, like the yard had been waiting to let us go. No final check, no signature, no one confirming the trailer number. We drove out the same way we'd come in, swallowed by the road, and those cold lights stayed behind us, steady and silent, watching until the darkness took us back. The compliance sheet showed up like an afterthought, which was the part that bothered me most. It wasn't taped to a window or slid across a desk in some dramatic back room. It was clipped to the bills in a plain manila sleeve that had our load number printed on a sticker. I didn't notice it until we were back on the frontage road, the yard lights shrinking behind us and the dark starting to thicken along the shoulders. I reached over the passenger side dash where I kept paperwork and pulled the sleeve open. The bills were standard enough. Pickup reference, trailer number, delivery appointment time. Then a single sheet of paper, thin and monochrome, tucked in front like it was just another page that needed to be signed and forgotten. Overnight compliance. I-80 segment protocol. No logo, no letterhead, no company name. Just a title in bold and a block of text underneath, printed in that clean, sterile font every office uses when they want something to feel official and non-negotiable. I read it the same way I read everything else on the road, like it could cost me money or time if I missed a detail, like it mattered even if I didn't like it. I didn't smirk, I didn't laugh, I didn't roll my eyes. Those are luxuries you earn when you're not the one who has to explain an accident to a trooper at 3 in the morning. Rule 1 was simple. Don't open the trailer. Don't break the seal. That one didn't even register as strange at first. Plenty of customers don't want drivers poking around. Plenty of loads are sealed and logged. You deliver, they cut the seal, end of story. Rule 2 made my jaw tighten. If a fresh reflective barrel or marker appears in lane, hold speed. No hard swerve. It was written like a safety reminder, but the wording felt off. Appears in lane. Not is in lane. Appears. Rule 3 was the kind of thing you only see in training manuals when someone's trying to sound clever. If you hear rhythmic contact from the trailer, strap slide, tapping, repeated shifting, tune the radio to a specified frequency and keep it there until it stops. There was a number printed next to it, the frequency itself, underlined once, like it was the most important part of the whole page. Rule 4 was a full paragraph, all caps in the first sentence. Do not stop in a defined mile marker segment for any reason, no exceptions. It listed a range of mile markers. It didn't say why. It didn't say weather. It didn't say construction. It just drew a line on the map and told you not to put your tires at 0 inside it. Rule 5 was almost normal again. If you must slow, do it gradually. Do not throw hazards. That one read like somebody who'd seen drivers panic brake in crosswind and wanted to prevent it. Hazards can make people behind you do dumb things. Gradual slowing keeps the trailer stable. Fine, I understood that one. Rule 6 was stranger. At the delivery gate, shut down, remain seated. Wait for 3 distinct signals before exiting. 3 distinct signals, not a green light. Not a call on the intercom. Signals. Rule 7 was the closest thing to a threat. Non-compliance voids delivery and triggers company response. Company response meant nothing and everything. It meant paperwork. It meant discipline. It meant somebody showing up to collect a trailer while you stood there pretending you weren't shaking. Sam leaned over from the passenger seat while I read. He'd been half watching the road, half watching his phone, but the title caught his attention. I felt him read along, eyes moving fast, and I could tell the exact moment he decided it was funny. He let out a short laugh, like a cough you don't bother hiding. "This is just corporate scare tactics," Sam insisted, trying to sound casual. He said it like he was explaining something to me, like I was the one who didn't understand the world. Anti-theft intimidation, a way to keep drivers from snooping. Something a customer demanded because some idiot had stolen a pallet of electronics once and now everyone had to suffer for it. Maybe he was right. I wanted him to be right. I wanted it to be nothing. I kept my eyes forward and held the wheel with one hand while the other folded the paper once, then again, creasing it clean. I didn't want it flapping around loose. I didn't want it disappearing under a seat where I couldn't find it when I needed it. I didn't want to treat it like a joke, because the road doesn't care if you think something is funny. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's the kind of rule you only get handed after someone learned it the hard way." Sam didn't answer right away. He made a small sound in his throat like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the angle. Then he shrugged and leaned back, already done with it. That was his gift. He could decide something didn't matter and move on like it never existed. I couldn't do that. Not with something written that plainly. I clipped the sheet to the top of my clipboard, right over the bills, where I could see the title whenever I glanced down. I didn't plan to read it again. I didn't need to. The rules were short enough to stick in your head, and the ones that didn't make sense were the ones your brain wouldn't stop circling anyway. The highway opened up ahead, black ribbon under the headlights, and the wind kept pressing at the trailer like it was still testing us. Sam started talking about pay rates and how fast we'd knock this out and be done before sunrise. I let him talk. I kept one hand on the wheel and one thought on that paper, the way it used the word appears, the way it drew a no-stop box on the map, the way it didn't ask for cooperation. It assumed it. And I told myself the same thing I always told myself when something felt off but I didn't have proof. Treat it like procedure. Follow it until the road proves you wrong. We merged onto I-80 the way you're supposed to in crosswind, smooth and patient, letting the rig settle before you commit to the lane. The pavement was clean in the headlights, dark and flat, and the wind was already there. It wasn't a gust that slapped the trailer sideways. It was a steady sideways pressure, like the state was leaning on the box to see if I'd overcorrect. I kept my hands light on the wheel and my speed steady, the boring kind of driving that keeps a trailer from starting to walk. Sam sat back with his coffee and that easy confidence he'd carried into the cab. I watched the road like it could change its mind at any moment. Mirrors on rhythm, lane markers, the red dots of the trailer lights staying centered. When the dots drift, you correct. When they stay true, you don't get fancy. The first thing that felt off was small enough to blame on fatigue. A mile marker slid into view on the right shoulder, green and reflective, and I clocked the number without thinking. A couple minutes later, another marker appeared, and the number jumped. Not wildly, just enough that my brain paused and didn't like the math. I told myself I'd missed one. That happens. You blink, you check the mirror, you look back and the sign is already behind you. A third marker came and looked right again, like the highway had snapped back into place. Wind can vibrate posts. Snow and grime can blur a digit. There were explanations that didn't require me to start inventing stories. I kept the truck steady and let the thought fall behind us. Far ahead, an electronic message board glowed over the right lane. It flickered like a dying light. The text wasn't readable even when we got close. It looked like half-formed letters, scrambled strokes, as if somebody had tried to type a warning and then erased it mid-sentence. The board blinked twice and went dark. Sam barely reacted. He glanced at it and looked away, like it was just another piece of state equipment that hadn't been maintained. That was fair. It still bothered me, because it felt less like a malfunction and more like a message that didn't want to be seen. A minute later, the radio made a single sharp pop. The unit was off. My hand hadn't been near it. I looked at the gauges out of habit. Everything held steady. If I'd been alone, I might have ignored it. Traffic was thin, a few distant taillights, no one close enough to matter. The wind kept its steady push. The road kept its straight promise. That's when the barrel appeared. It sat dead center in our lane, bright with reflective stripes, clean as if it had never met road spray. Not on the shoulder, not behind a taper of cones, no construction signs, no flashing arrows, no warning. Just one brand new barrel placed like a question. My headlights hit it hard, and for a second it looked almost too bright, like it belonged to a different scene. Sam reacted before his brain caught up. He leaned forward, tension in his shoulders, and I could feel the instinct in him, the urge to steer around it the way every driver is trained to do. His hand lifted slightly. He looked at me, expecting the wheel to turn. Rule 2 was clipped to the clipboard, but I didn't need to look at it. Hold lane, hold speed. No hard swerve. I didn't accelerate. I didn't brake. I didn't jerk the truck. I held the wheel centered and kept my line. The distance closed. My brain still tried to tell me it was plastic, hollow, something that would bounce and roll away. A barrel like that should crumple under a semi or explode into pieces. It should feel like nothing. When we hit it, the sensation was wrong. The truck shuddered, a heavy vibration that traveled up through the steering column into my arms and chest. Not a crash, not enough to throw us, but enough that you felt it as resistance. The trailer tugged once behind me, subtle but real, like the box had just met something that didn't want to move. The sound was dull, muffled, more like striking dense rubber than breaking plastic. My hand stayed steady. I kept the rig straight. I didn't hit the brakes. I waited for the second event, the one that actually causes damage. Then it was gone. In the mirrors there was nothing. No barrel tumbling in the lane, no pieces skittering onto the shoulder, no dust plume, just dark pavement and the faint glow of our taillights. The road looked clean, like the barrel had never existed. Sam didn't speak for several seconds. I could feel him trying to square what he'd felt with what he was seeing. He shifted in the seat, small movements, like his body was checking itself for a bruise. "Okay, that wasn't plastic," Sam muttered, and I could hear him trying to turn it into a joke. I kept my eyes forward and my speed steady. I told myself there were explanations. Sand-filled barrels, weighted markers, some idiot playing a prank, maybe. But the clean placement, the new shine, and the way it vanished from the mirror like it had been erased stayed with me. The night wasn't loud about it. It didn't need to be. It had made its point, and it let us keep driving. I tried to let it go. I tried to scrub it out with routine, with mirror checks and lane discipline, with the simple belief that highways don't play games. The road kept rolling, the wind kept leaning on the trailer, and the gauges stayed calm. That should have reset everything. It didn't. Sam filled the silence for a while, talking about miles and pay and how we'd be done before the sky turned. His voice had changed, though. Less joking. More talking to cover the space. We were maybe 10 minutes past it when the sound started in the trailer. It wasn't a bang. It wasn't a random rattle. It was a scrape, drawn out and deliberate, like a load strap sliding across metal decking. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. The pause was always the same length. The scrape always had the same pressure, like something was pulling and then waiting. I checked the mirrors. The trailer tracked straight. No sway, no smoke, no loose door. Just the red dots of the lights in a clean white box behind me. I listened again. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. It sounded like it was coming from inside the van, not from the fifth wheel, not from the tires. Sam heard it too. He stopped mid-thought and tilted his head like he was trying to locate it by ear. The scrape repeated, louder this time. The same pattern, the same patience. If it was straps, it was the neatest strap noise I'd ever heard. Straps don't keep tempo. Sam leaned forward, eyes flicking to the mirror and back to me. He wanted a stop, a flashlight, a simple explanation. That's how drivers survive, by turning unknowns into repairs. But Rule 4 sat in my mind like a hard limit. The no-stop segment was coming up, and out here, you don't pull over just because you're curious, not in wind, not at night, not with a trailer that already felt touchy. If the freight was really shifting, I'd feel it in the steering, in the sway, in the way the box tried to steer me. I felt none of that. The scrape came again. Same beat, same pause. My mouth went dry, not from panic, but from the shift in my brain when I realized this wasn't mechanical. It was pattern, like it expected a response. I glanced down at the clipboard without letting my eyes leave the lane for more than a heartbeat. The compliance sheet was right there. The frequency was underlined. I hadn't meant to memorize it, but I did anyway, the way you remember a code when you don't know what it unlocks. The scrape repeated, sharper, like it was getting impatient. I reached for the radio. I kept one hand steady on the wheel and turned the knob with the other. Controlled movements, the kind you do when you're trying not to admit the cab just got smaller. The display lit up, and the speakers hissed with thin static. I tuned to the number on the page. No music came in, no station ID, no late-night ad, just a voice, clean and flat, like a dispatcher reading a checklist into a headset. It didn't sound local. It sounded like it had been waiting behind the dash. "Maintain lane." The voice said it like a fact. I kept the wheel centered, my eyes on the white line. "Do not acknowledge external signals." The voice didn't pause, didn't change tone, just delivered the words and moved on, like it had said the sentence 1,000 times. The phrase sat heavy in my chest. External signals meant hazard lights, a person waving, a flare on the shoulder. It meant the things you're trained to respond to without thinking. Proceed. The voice finished, and the speakers went quiet again, a clean silence that felt worse than static. The scraping stopped. Not gradually. It cut off like someone flipped a switch. Sam's breath hitched. He pressed a hand to his forehead, then dropped it. The dashlight showed his face going pale. He swallowed hard and blinked fast, like the pressure behind his eyes had spiked. He shifted in the seat like he couldn't get comfortable, and for a second, he looked like he might get sick right there on the floor mat. "What station is this?" Sam snapped, and the laugh he added didn't work. "The one the paper told us to use," I said quietly, and I hated how that sounded out loud. Sam leaned closer to the radio, staring at the frequency display like it might confess. He rubbed his temple again, slower this time. His knee bounced once, then stopped. He didn't ask me to pull over again. He didn't say straps anymore. He just stared out at the dark, jaw tight. The radio stayed on. The voice didn't return. The trailer stayed quiet, as if it had been trained. I kept driving with my hands light and my speed steady, and I couldn't tell if the radio was a tool or a leash. All I knew was this: when it spoke, whatever was back there stopped making itself known. The radio stayed on after that, not because I wanted it, but because turning it off felt like inviting the scraping back. The cab was warm and dry, the kind of heat that makes your eyes sting after a few hours, and Sam sat angled away from the speakers like the sound had a physical edge. He tried to sit still and failed. He shifted his hips, rolled his shoulders, pressed his fingers to his temple, then dropped his hand like he didn't want to admit it helped. I drove the way I always drove when a night started getting complicated. Smooth inputs, steady speed. Let the wind do what it was going to do and don't give it anything extra. The crosswind was still there, a constant sideways push that made the trailer feel eager to lean. I corrected with small movements and kept the wheel light. Mirror checks on rhythm, left, right, spot, back to the lane. The red dots of the trailer lights stayed centered behind us. Sam kept talking, but it wasn't joking anymore. It was noise, a way to keep the cab from going quiet enough for him to hear his own thoughts. He glanced at the radio display, then at the clipboard where the sheet was clipped, then back out the windshield like the dark might explain itself. A chain-up area sign appeared ahead, reflective and clean. Totally normal out here. A wide gravel pull-off used for chains when the weather turns, or for a quick check when you have to. No building, no bathroom, just space and a sign. Sam locked onto it anyway. His eyes had that restless shine people get when they decide rules don't apply to them. He shifted forward in the seat like his body had decided before his brain did. The no-stop segment was coming up. Rule 4 sat in my head like a hard boundary, and the mile marker range on the page wasn't far ahead. I wanted to push through, clear it clean, then stop somewhere real, somewhere lit. Sam didn't want to wait. The longer the radio stayed on and the more controlled the cab felt, the more he fought it. He hated being told what to do. He hated that I trusted paper more than him. He started moving like a guy trying to crawl out of his own skin. He rubbed his face, bounced his knee, lifted a hand toward the radio knob, then stopped when he felt my eyes on him. I didn't want to fight in the cab at night. I didn't want him doing something reckless just to prove he could. People get stupid when they feel trapped. I watched the tight set of his jaw and knew he was close to forcing the issue anyway. So I compromised. The kind of compromise that feels reasonable right up until it isn't. I signaled and eased off the throttle, slowing gradually like Rule 5 said, and took the chain-up exit. No hazards, no hard brake, just a controlled drift down the ramp with the engine steady and the trailer tracking straight. The pull-off was empty, gravel and packed snow under the headlights, a few reflective posts marking the edge. The highway ran close, but it sounded farther away than it should have. I stopped with the engine running and the lights on. Brake set. For a second, I kept my hands on the wheel, waiting for the wind to press again. It didn't. The wind dropped the moment the tires stopped turning. Not a fade, not a lull. It was gone, like somebody had muted the world. The pressure that had been leaning on the trailer vanished, and the sudden stillness made my skin prickle. The radio turned into dead air. No music, no static, no voice, just a faint empty hiss. I stared at the display. Same frequency, same glow. Nothing coming through. It felt like the system had decided it didn't need to talk to us while we were sitting still. Without the wind and without the radio, the cab got too quiet. I could hear the truck cooling, metal ticking, plastic settling, the soft creak of the seat as Sam shifted. Sounds that normally get buried under motion. I glanced at the dash clock out of habit. The digits hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second, a tiny stutter, then continued like nothing happened. Sam swung his door open and climbed down fast. "I'm not sitting in here listening to that crap," Sam barked. He hit the gravel in the headlight beam and stood there for a second, shoulders raised against the cold. At first he did normal things. He stretched his legs, rolled his neck, walked a small circle near the cab, boots crunching. He looked back at me once, and I could see the challenge in his posture, like he wanted me to argue so he could win. I didn't. 2 minutes, I told him. Stay where I can see you. He turned his head just enough to let me know he heard me. Relax, he said, and the word came out like an insult. Then he walked toward the back of the trailer. Not far, not at first. Just a few steps still in the edge of the headlight spill. Then he kept going, sliding out of the bright cone and into the darker band behind it. The trailer blocked the beams, and Sam disappeared behind the white box like he'd stepped behind a wall. I waited for the crunch of his boots coming back. 10 seconds passed, then 15. Nothing changed. I called his name once. My voice sounded wrong in the still air, too loud for such a quiet place. No answer came back, no footsteps, no movement behind the trailer, not even a cough. Every instinct I had told me to get out, go around the trailer, find my partner. Another part of me stayed glued to the seat, and I hated that part. Fear, simple and ugly, and guilt riding right behind it. I stared at the edge of the headlight spill where Sam had vanished and tried to force my legs to move. I didn't move. I sat there with the engine idling and the lights blazing into empty gravel, and I understood what I'd done. I'd broken a rule because it felt easier than managing the man beside me. I'd made a human compromise in a night that didn't care about human reasons. The punishment wasn't loud, no crash, no scream, just absence. Sam had stepped out of my headlights, and the darkness took him like he'd never been there at all. I waited another few seconds, then called Sam's name again. No answer. I stepped down and stayed inside the headlights, close enough that I could still pretend the light was protection. I didn't go behind the trailer. I couldn't. Not after watching the dark swallow him without a sound. So I looked down instead. The gravel was dusted with thin, crusted snow, just enough to hold a tread if you stepped on it. Sam's footprints were clear for several paces, heading toward the rear of the trailer. The pattern was normal. Straight line. Slight outward angle on one boot, the way some people walk. Then the print stopped abruptly, like the ground simply decided it wasn't going to record him anymore. No slide, no stumble, no turn, no return path. Just the last full print, and then nothing beyond it. I stared at that last print until my eyes started to burn, waiting for my brain to hand me a simple answer. He stepped onto a patch of ice. He jumped up onto the frame. He walked where the snow didn't stick. None of it fit. The snow would have cracked, the gravel would have shifted, there would have been something. Instead, it looked like the rest of his path never happened. I backed up without turning my back on the trailer, climbed into the cab, and shut the door hard. Then, I locked it. The click sounded too loud in the stillness. I sat there with both hands on the wheel for a second, like I needed something solid to hold on to. The radio was still dead air. That thin hiss wasn't static. It was absence. I turned the dial back to the protocol frequency anyway. even though I already knew it would be silent. I did it because it was the only action that felt remotely connected to the rules. The only thing I could do that didn't involve stepping into the darkness where Sam had vanished. The frequency held. The voice didn't come back. My phone had signal. Of course it did. 4 bars and a clean connection while my co-driver disappeared 10 feet from my headlights. I called after-hours dispatch. Dana's number was in my recent calls from earlier in the week, a name I didn't think about unless something went wrong. She answered fast. No small talk, no confusion, just a calm presence on the line like she'd been waiting for my call. "My co-driver's gone," I said, and my voice came out too controlled, like my brain was trying to keep me from breaking. Dana didn't ask if I was joking. She didn't ask what I meant. She went straight into a checklist, the way someone does when they've been trained for one specific kind of problem. She asked where I was, what exit, what mile marker, and whether I'd stopped inside the restricted segment. She asked if the trailer seal was intact. She asked if the truck was operable. She asked the questions like they were boxes she needed to check before she could move to the next step. I answered them, because answering felt better than sitting in silence. When I finished, there was a pause that lasted just long enough for me to hope she'd say she was sending someone. Instead, her voice stayed level, almost gentle, like she was trying not to startle an animal. "Continue the route," Dana said quietly, like she was reading a policy off a screen. My grip tightened on the wheel. My chest felt too tight for the air in the cab. Outside, the pull-off stayed frozen in stillness, headlights carving a bright island out of a world that refused to explain itself. "You're telling me to leave him," I snapped. "I'm telling you you can't retrieve him," she insisted, tried to stay calm. "Not in that segment, not tonight." The words hit like a verdict. Not in that segment, not tonight. Like the road itself had rules that overruled people. Like the best option wasn't rescue, it was containment. My mind flashed to the compliance sheet clipped on the clipboard, the way Rule 4 had been written in hard language. No exceptions, no reasons, just do not stop. My throat went dry. I looked at the edge of the headlights spill again, at the place where the darkness started, and I pictured myself walking around the trailer, calling Sam's name into a black space that didn't answer. I pictured finding nothing. Or worse, finding something that made me stop being a driver and start being a missing person, too. "Then what do?" I said. "You follow the protocol," she told me. "We'll handle the rest." That last line was the part that stayed with me. Not because it was cruel, but because it was clean. It treated Sam like an incident the company could process, like a load shift or a breakdown. "We'll handle the rest." It meant paperwork. It meant calls. It meant police reports. It meant some other person showing up in daylight to deal with whatever the night had taken. And it meant my job, right now, was to get back on the highway and keep moving, like my partner hadn't just vanished off the side of the road. I stared at the radio. I stared at the clipboard. I stared at the darkness beyond my headlights. Then I put my hands where they belonged, took a slow breath, and did the only thing the rules still allowed me to do. I pulled back onto I-80 and continued the route. The highway took me back like nothing had happened. The ramp curved, the tires hummed, and the wind found the trailer again as soon as I merged. It leaned into the box with that same steady pressure, like the state had been holding its breath at the pull-off and decided it was done waiting. The passenger seat was empty. I kept looking at it anyway. Not on purpose, just habit. A quick glance like I expected Sam to be there, slumped with his coffee, rubbing his temple, ready with another comment about how I overthink. Every time my eyes landed on that blank space, it felt like hitting a bruise. I hated myself for it. I hated the part of my brain that still wanted to see him there, because wanting didn't change anything. The cab felt bigger without him, and that made it worse. More air, more silence, more room for thoughts I didn't want. The radio stayed on the protocol frequency, but it was still dead. No static, no voice, just that thin hiss. I kept it there anyway. Donna's words sat in my head like a stamp. Continue the route, follow the protocol. I drove like a machine for a while, speed steady, hands light, mirror rhythm. The world narrowed to lane lines and the red dots of the trailer lights. If I kept the job mechanical, maybe my brain wouldn't have time to imagine Sam's face out there in the dark behind the box. Maybe it wouldn't replay his last word to me like it mattered. The first sign that I wasn't alone in this anymore was the sound in the trailer. It started as a scrape again, but stronger than before, heavier, like something with more weight was moving against the floor. Scrape, pause, scrape. Same patience, same timing. Only now it felt closer, like the sound had learned where the cab was, learned how to send the vibration forward through the frame. It wasn't random settling, it was deliberate. It had the confidence of something that knew I was going to listen. My fingers tightened on the wheel. I checked the mirrors. The trailer still tracked straight. No sway, no visible movement. Just a white box behind me carrying whatever it carried, and a night that refused to admit anything was wrong. The scrape repeated, louder. Then it changed. Not a new noise, but a shift in tone, like the friction had found a different surface, like it had adjusted itself to the truck's rhythm. It felt like synchronization, like it was learning me. I didn't stop. I didn't even ease off. Rule 4 was a wall in my head, and the memory of those footprints ending in nothing was enough to keep my foot steady. I kept going and reached for the radio knob with a controlled hand. The dial was already on the frequency. I didn't need to search. I just turned the volume up one notch, the way you do when you're afraid the message is going to be too quiet to hear. The speakers clicked, and the voice came back. It wasn't the generic dispatch tone from earlier. It didn't start with a command like it was reading a sign. It spoke like it knew I'd been alone for miles, like it knew the cab was quieter now. "Daniel," the voice said, and it landed in the space where Sam's breathing used to be. My throat tightened. I kept my eyes on the lane. I kept the wheel steady. I told myself names aren't magic. Names are just data. Companies have records. Dispatch has rosters. A voice could be recorded. A frequency could be programmed. But the voice didn't sound recorded. It sounded present. "You're cleared." The words came out crisp, emotionless. The scrape stopped instantly like it had been waiting for that sentence. "Do not reverse." The voice didn't pause, didn't check for confirmation. I stared at the dark stretch ahead. Reversing out here wouldn't even make sense, not on a highway, not at speed. But the instruction wasn't about driving technique. It was about something else. It was about the urge, the human urge to turn around, to go back, to fix what you broke. "Do not stop." The voice continued, same tone, same certainty. My hands felt cold on the wheel despite the heater. I swallowed once, hard, and kept going. The wind pressed the trailer. The lane lines slid under my headlights like nothing had changed. "Delivery is the containment." The voice finished, and the words made my stomach drop. Containment, not delivery, not service, not a contract. Containment. The truth snapped into place in a way I didn't want. The rules weren't written to keep me safe. They weren't written to protect the truck or the freight or the company's reputation. They were written to keep whatever was inside that trailer from getting loose on the open road. They were written to keep it moving, to keep it sealed, to keep it en route, to keep it from interacting with anything it shouldn't. I wasn't the customer. I wasn't the asset. I was the mechanism. "Delivery isn't the payment," the voice said, calm as a weather report. "Delivery is containment." My grip tightened so hard my knuckles ached. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. The cab felt too clean, too controlled, like a room where someone else held the key. I didn't answer. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't demand an explanation, because explanations weren't going to help, and because some part of me understood that responding was a kind of acknowledgement. Rule 3 had said, do what you're told until the signal stops. Rule 4 had said, don't stop. Dana had said you can't retrieve him. Everything in this night was built around one idea: keep moving. I didn't answer it, I said, and even alone I kept my voice down. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark and indifferent. The passenger seat stayed empty. The trailer stayed quiet. The radio stayed on that frequency like it belonged there. And I drove, because the rules were no longer something printed on paper. They were something the night enforced. The wind eased up the way it does when the land starts to change. Not calm, not friendly, just less eager to shove the trailer sideways. The highway signs thinned out, and the next exit didn't advertise a town or a gas station or anything meant for normal people. It was a small reflective panel and an arrow, like the road was pointing at a service route that wasn't supposed to matter. I took it anyway. By then, the choice didn't feel like mine. The rules had turned into rails, and I was riding them. The ramp dropped me onto a dark access road that ran straight through scrub and low trees, packed gravel patched with old snow. My headlights reached only so far, and everything beyond that was flat black. No street lights, no distant porch glow. The road felt built for trucks and nothing else, a strip of ground that existed only to lead you from one sealed place to another. A fence rose ahead, chain link topped with barbed wire. Cameras sat on poles and corners, angled down like they were counting every inch of my approach. The gate at the end wasn't impressive, just heavy metal bars and a keypad mounted on a steel post. No banner, no logo, no sign that said Black Ridge Transfer Facility. The name existed on paper and in my head, and that was it. Behind the gate, lights burned in uneven patches. Some fixtures worked, some were dead, and the gaps between them held shadows thick enough to hide anything that didn't want to be seen. Dock numbers were painted on steel plates, white numerals without names, like the place didn't need identity. It just needed function. I rolled up and stopped short of the gate, not right against it. Close enough to be in range of the cameras, far enough that I could pull out if I had to. I put the truck in park and sat there with both hands resting on my thighs, listening to the engine idle and the faint tick of cooling metal in the dash. Rule 6 was clear. Shut down, remain seated, wait for 3 distinct signals before exiting. I turned the key and killed the engine. The cab dropped into a quiet so complete it made my ears ring. Without the motor, every small sound got sharper. Air settling in the lines, a plastic panel creaking as it cooled, wind whispering through the fence wires. The radio went dead the instant the ignition died, like it was tethered to the truck's heartbeat. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like the room had been sealed. I stayed still. I didn't lean toward the window. I didn't reach for the door handle. I kept my eyes forward on the gate and the camera housings. The passenger seat sat empty beside me, a shape the darkness had changed. I didn't look at it longer than a blink. The first signal came from inside the cab, a sharp click, clean and close, like a relay snapping shut behind the dash. It wasn't a settling noise. It wasn't random. It had the precision of a switch being flipped on purpose. I held my breath and waited. The second signal came from lower and farther back, a heavy thump from the fifth wheel area, like someone had struck the locking jaw with a metal bar. The vibration traveled up through the frame and into the seat, a dull punch you feel in your ribs more than you hear. The trailer didn't shift, but the rig registered it like impact. The gate stayed closed. The cameras didn't move. The lights held steady in their uneven pattern. I waited for the third signal because the rule didn't care what my instincts were screaming. It cared that I followed steps in order. The third sound came from directly under the passenger seat. A close exhale, almost a hiss, like an air brake line dumping pressure right beneath the cushion where Sam had been sitting. It wasn't the normal sigh of a truck settling after shutdown. It was too localized, too intimate. It sounded like something breathing out through a valve. 3 signals, done. I opened the door and stepped out into cold air that felt sharper than it should have. The yard smelled like rust, old snow, and the faint metallic bite of machinery that hadn't moved in a long time. My boots hit gravel loud enough to echo. I didn't stand there taking it in. I didn't want the place in my memory any more than it already was. I wanted the trailer off my 5th wheel and distance between me and that gate. I moved fast, hands sure, head down, airlines off, electrical line off, landing gear down, cranked until it bit solid into gravel. 5th wheel release pulled. Everything done in the order my body had repeated 1,000 times, like muscle memory could keep my mind from wandering to the wrong questions. I didn't circle the trailer. I didn't walk to the rear doors. I didn't look at the seal. I treated the box like it was hot. When the kingpin let go, the trailer settled onto its legs with a heavy thud. The sound echoed off the fence and died into the dark like the place swallowed it. I climbed back into the cab and shut the door. For a second, I just sat there, hands hovering near the wheel, ready to start the engine and leave, ready to be done. That's when I saw it on the passenger seat. A small personal item, a lanyard with a badge clip, the kind of cheap nylon strap drivers wear for yard access and time clocks. Sam's, or something that looked exactly like Sam's. It lay across the seat fabric like it had been placed there carefully, not dropped. It was cold wet, damp the way cloth gets after being outside in snow and then brought into warm air. A dark oval of moisture spread into the upholstery beneath it. My throat tightened. My hands stayed suspended, not quite willing to move. I didn't pick it up right away, I said. I stared at it like it might move. The cab felt like it was waiting, like the system had finished its work and left me a receipt. Not an apology, not proof of life. Just a reminder that whatever rules I'd followed, I hadn't been the one in control. I started the engine. The truck shuddered back to life. Dash lights came on. Gauges climbed into their normal places. The radio stayed silent for a beat, then hissed with ordinary emptiness, the kind that belongs to normal stations and normal air. I pulled away from the gate without looking back at the trailer. I didn't need to. The job was complete. The containment had been delivered, and Sam had been reduced to a wet strap on a seat, like the only part of him the process considered worth returning. The farther I got from the fence line, the more normal the world pretended to be. The access road fed back into the highway like a vein reconnecting to the body. The wind returned in honest gusts that pushed the tractor the way wind is supposed to push it. My GPS refreshed cleanly, the blue route line snapping into place without hesitation, like it had never doubted where I was. I spun the radio off the protocol frequency and landed on a regular station on the first try. Music, ads, a cheerful voice talking about the weather like it was just numbers and not a threat. Everything worked again, smooth and obedient, and that was almost worse than the wrongness. I kept driving until the sky began to lighten at the edges. Not sunrise yet, just that faint gray that makes the horizon visible again. I watched it through the windshield and felt nothing like relief. My body was still wound tight, still waiting for a scrape from the trailer that wasn't even attached anymore. My eyes kept flicking to the passenger seat, and each time I saw the lanyard, I felt my stomach turn. I didn't touch it. I didn't throw it out. I left it where it was, like moving it would make something true I wasn't ready to hold. My phone buzzed with a dispatch message, automated, professional, 2 lines, no punctuation that mattered, delivery completed, premium approved, a dollar amount that would have made me grin any other night. No mention of Sam, not his name, not a note, not even a neutral phrase like personnel incident acknowledged. Just confirmation that the system got what it wanted. I drove another 20 minutes and pulled into a real truck stop, one of the bright ones with a glowing sign, and cars in the lot and people walking in and out like it was a normal morning. The light inside was warm. The air smelled like coffee and fried food. Someone laughed near the drink coolers. A clerk argued with a guy about lottery tickets. It all felt staged, like I'd stepped onto a set after spending hours in a place that didn't have voices. I parked, shut the truck down, and sat for a moment with my hands in my lap. My fingers still felt like they were gripping the wheel. When I finally climbed out, the cold hit me in a familiar way, the honest kind. Wind, winter, reality. I walked inside and let the noise and the light wash over me until my heartbeat slowed enough that I could breathe without hearing it. Then I called Dana again. I didn't want to. I wanted to leave it alone, let the company handle the rest the way she'd promised. But Sam's name kept sitting in my mouth like a stone. I couldn't swallow it. I needed to hear a human voice acknowledge what happened, even if it was cold. She answered after a few rings. Same calm. Same lack of surprise. "You did what you were supposed to do," Donna said quietly, and I realized she wasn't comforting me. She was grating me. The words punched a hollow space in my chest. She didn't say Sam was alive. She didn't say they'd found him. She didn't say she was sorry. Just the evaluation, like my performance mattered more than the missing person. I stood by the coffee station with my phone pressed to my ear and stared at nothing. Around me, people kept living. Cups filled, doors opened. A trucker dropped coins into a slot machine. The world kept moving, and Dana's voice stayed smooth and distant. Then she added the only line that sounded like it belonged in a report. Authorities had been notified. She said it like she was closing a ticket. Then she ended the call. I stayed there for a second longer, phone in my hand, listening to the dead tone. Even colder than her voice was the idea that this was normal enough to have a script, normal enough that she could be calm about it. I walked back out to the truck without buying anything. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. The lanyard was still on the passenger seat, damp against the fabric. I stared at it once, then looked away. On the road again, with daylight bleeding into the sky, I made myself a promise I didn't know I'd be making when this run started. No more compliance sheets, not ever. No more overnight team runs through Wyoming, not on I-80, not in winter, not for any premium. And if I ever had a partner in my cab again, I wouldn't let them step out into a dead segment, not for a bathroom, not for air, not for pride. I'd rather fight with a living man than sit alone with his absence. The next morning, I was parked in a rest area with the sun up and my eyes still feeling like sandpaper. I hadn't slept. I'd just shut the curtains, sat in the dark of the sleeper, and listened to normal highway noise like it was something I didn't deserve. My phone rang a little after 8. The caller ID said State Patrol. A trooper told me they'd found Sam on the shoulder of I-80 a few miles from the segment, unconscious, mild hypothermia, dehydrated, no major injuries, no broken bones, no blood, just a man laid out like he'd been dropped there and forgotten. They got him to a hospital and warmed him up and got fluids into him. Physically, he came back fast the way young bodies do. But he didn't talk. He wouldn't look out a window if the road was visible. He flinched when the wind hit the building and made the glass vibrate. When a nurse turned on a radio in the hallway, Sam jerked like somebody had snapped a strap too close to his ear. The trooper didn't sound like he believed in anything strange. He sounded like a guy who'd seen enough bad nights to stop asking why. He just gave me the facts, then paused like he was choosing his words. "He's alive," the trooper said, "but he's not present." I sat there with the phone against my ear, staring at the damp lanyard on my passenger seat. The cab was bright with morning, the kind of light that's supposed to make things feel safe again. It didn't. Something in Sam had been left behind on that stretch of road, and hearing it out loud made me realize the same was true for me. I could still drive, still follow lines, still deliver freight, but But whatever part of me used to believe the night was just empty space had never made it back into the daylight.